Okay, hello there. So today I want to talk about externality. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is to discuss what an externality is. Okay, so an externality is a cost or benefit that arises when a person engages in an activity that influences the well being of a bystander, but neither pays nor receives compensation for that effect. Okay, so the bystander here doesn't receive any compensation or any compensation for the cost or doesn't pay for the benefits. Okay, so that's an externality. Okay, now that we've spoken about what an externality is, I want to talk about the history. Okay, so let's just touch on the history to see how this came about. Okay, so the first economist to lay down the idea of externality is Alfred Marshall. Okay, and it was later expanded by his student called Arthur Pigou at Cambridge University. Okay, so Arthur Pigou was the scholar to bring out about this idea of a Pigouvian tax. Okay, so the Pigouvian tax was a way to deal with externalities, a way he suggested we deal with externalities, and I will go into details in a separate video. Okay, and later there was another popular economics called Ronald Coase, who said that the issue of externalities was as a result of poorly defined property rights. And so he explained this by giving an example of a confectioner with his noisy machine and a quiet doctor next door. Okay, so you have this confectioner who has this noisy machine, right? Okay, that makes sweets. Okay. And next door you have the doctor. And so what Ronald Coase says is that if you want to solve this issue, okay, of an externality, so in this case the noise disturbing the doctor, we can have a situation where the law would give the right to the confectioner to make noise, and you can solve this. Sorry about that. And you can solve this problem by bargaining. Okay, so the doctor can pay the confectioner to keep quiet. Okay, so that's the main idea behind what Ronald Coase said. Another popular economist who alluded to this issue of externalities is Adam Smith. In his popular book titled The Wealth of Nations. Okay, so in that book, he advocates for the invisible hand, okay, to freely allocate resources. Okay, so I quote from his book. He says, "It is not out of the benevolence of the brewer, butcher, or baker that we get our own meal, but from a regard to their own interests." Okay, so he noted that in as much as you leave people to freely interact, right, to bring out a good outcome, or to allocate resources efficiently, because people are looking out for their interest, they wouldn't factor in how their actions can lead to externalities. Okay, so for instance, if you go to the market, people sell what they want to sell, right? But then no one is usually concerned about how their activities make the street dirty. Okay, that's an example. Or no one is concerned about the blocked sewages. Okay, so these are all externalities that need to be accounted for. Okay, so let's get back to externalities again. So when we are talking about externalities, it's important to take note that buyers and sellers do not take into account the external effects of their actions when deciding how much to demand or supply. So that's what I just said with the example I gave earlier, and hence the market equilibrium is not efficient when there are externalities. Okay, so we'll talk about how to deal with this issue of market failure when we have externalities. So let me give you an example. So an example of an externality is dioxin. Okay, so let's say dioxin is produced from a steel manufacturing plant. Okay, so why is it an externality? Okay, so this is a classic example of a negative externality because in this case, the firm is engaging in an activity which is producing a harmful substance, that is dioxin, that influences the well-being of a bystander. Okay, so the bystanders are the consumers or the people who live in the environs of this steel manufacturing firm, and they do not receive any compensation for the production of the dioxin. Okay, so this is a classic example of a negative externality. Okay, and here the market equilibrium is not efficient because one, the firm does not consider the full cost, the consumers also don't consider the full cost, and hence we need the government to step in, otherwise the firm will produce too much. So we'll see how the government steps in here. Okay, so let's look at this example here, okay, and how we can deal with externalities. Okay, so in this example here, I'm looking at the externalities from a steel firm. Okay, so here, so in economics, we use graph theory to help us explain certain economic concepts. Okay, so we have what we call demand curves and supply curves. So in welfare economics, you learn that the demand curve shows your willingness to pay. Okay, so this demand curve here, right, shows willingness to pay. So the short form is WTP. Okay, so the first thing I did was to look at the private demand and the private supply, or the private cost. Okay, so the cost is also represents the supply curve. So where they intersect, okay, so this is it. So I'm looking at this right here. This looks okay. And then the supply, let me change the color. Let's say red. Okay, so this is the supply. Okay, so where they intersect is what we call the equilibrium. Okay, so that is the market equilibrium when we do not account for externalities. Okay, now if we account for the externalities, we see that we would have a higher cost. Okay, and the higher cost translates to a lower quantity. Okay, so we can see that in our social cost curve. Sorry, my lines are a bit wobbly there. Okay, so there at the intersection, right, we have the optimum quantity. Why is this the optimum quantity? Okay, it's the optimum quantity because we looked at the interaction of the demand, okay, the private demand and the social cost curve. And note the social cost curve absorbs the externality, so it factors in the cost of the externality. Okay, so hence if we produce at the intersection at that equilibrium, we have the optimal. Okay, so below the level, below this level, right, so below this quantity here, right, we say that the value to the consumer is greater than the social cost. Okay, and above that value, okay, so above this quantity, above this value, so if you go down this way, we say that the value is less than the social cost. Okay, so it means the social cost is greater than the value to the consumer. Okay, so that's why we need to account for negative externalities. So how do we make sure that the private cost curve intersects with the social cost curve? Okay, so how do we make sure that this intersects with this? Okay, so one way is through taxes. Okay, so if you incorporate taxes, right, this curve will shift back and coincide with this curve. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so that is how it works. And for a positive externality, so in this example I have education, so we are going to focus on the demand curves here. So we have our private value and then our social value curves. Okay, so with positive externalities, the value to the society is higher than the value to the consumers. Okay, so for instance, with education, it leads to positive externality because we have technological innovations as a result of education that benefits everyone. Okay, or it could be in the form of educating people to vote. Okay, so it would lead to an outcome that everyone will benefit from. So in that case, what you want is this. Okay, so if that is the case, the way we can achieve that is through subsidization of education. Okay, because for positive externalities, the benefits to society is greater than the benefits to consumers. I hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section. I know this might be a bit difficult to digest, but take it one step at a time. Okay, thank you.